President Trump says America is returning to real energy dominance, announcing the opening of the first new U.S. oil refinery in 50 years in Brownsville, Texas. Joining us now to talk about this is Daniel Turner, founder and executive director of Power the Future. Daniel, good afternoon to you. Can I just first off, your reaction to the $300 billion oil facility?
It's a huge step in the right direction. The refining problem has always been a choke point. You can produce all the crude that you want, and we are producing a record amount right now, 13.6 million barrels. But if your refining capacity doesn't increase, then it's not going to have the impact on overall pricing that you want increased production to have. So this is a really important step in the right direction. America needs to maintain its refining dominance of the world. China is trying to overtake America. They're far behind, but they are catching up very, very quickly. And we don't want to let any other country dominate the refining game.
Okay, why do we not want that? It seems obvious, but lay it out for us simply. Why do we not want other countries, such as adversaries like China, be dominant in this space?
Well, because crude doesn't really have value in and of itself. Crude oil only has value in what it becomes. And to have it become something, whether it's gasoline for a car, whether it's jet fuel, whether it's rocket fuel, whether it's the raw materials of plastic or of rubber or of anything else, all of that comes from the refining process. And if you control the refining process, then you control the raw materials for all the world's industry. That's why it's so important that America maintains this dominance, right? We saw this in previous worse administrations where we outsourced a lot of our raw materials, especially to places like communist China. And then they dominate those markets. And so, yes, we can talk about how, we want to be number one in furniture, or we don't want to be number one in automotives. But if the raw materials come from China, then we'll never be number one. We'll always be dependent upon them. And all raw materials come from the refining process.
Okay, so at the same time, Iran's new supreme leader is threatening energy supplies, saying the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. So in this context, amid everything that is happening, talk to us about the importance of energy independence. And I think this goes alongside of refining dominance.
It does. And you know what? I don't want to see Americans, or anyone for that matter, pay higher prices for gasoline or for utilities or for oil on the world market. But America is in a much better position than our Asian friends or than all of our European allies, because we do have an abundant supply, domestic supply. If you are some of our Asian allies, if you're Europe, you're in a pickle right now because you desperately need your oil and gas to come from this part of the world. It makes no sense, especially if you have a domestic supply. A country like the United Kingdom has huge oil and gas reserves in the North Sea, but they shut them down for climate reasons. And so now they're dependent on the Middle East. A country like China, however, our number one adversary, they don't have a domestic oil and gas supply. So they need oil and gas from the Middle East. But because of just a geographical vulnerability that they have. So I'd rather be in America's position, but I'd much rather be in a place where there are no more tensions in this region of the world and we have stable pricing for this commodity.
So I'm just thinking here, based on what you said, does energy independence actually give the U.S. more power on the world stage? Because, for example, the U.S. can then impose sanctions on certain oil-producing countries without risking domestic shortages.
Absolutely. And evidence of that is just oil prices right now. When last I looked before we came live on this segment, West Texas Intermediary oil, the American exchange, was around $97 a barrel, which is a lot, right? But Murban, which is the oil exchange of the Middle East, was about 122. That's a $25 a barrel difference. That's a huge difference. And the difference is that American oil and gas, American oil numbers are domestic. We know we don't have a supply problem, but the Middle East does, right? They're having a transportation problem. They're stopping producing oil because they don't have a place to store it. because their storage is full because they can't export it out because of the straits being closed. So that's an example of how energy dominance, domestic energy dominance, is so key to our survival, because our prices are $25 a barrel lower. And if we could return to more global stability, they'll come down even another $25 a barrel. Domestic energy production is everything in the game.
So I just want to read you a quote from President Trump. He says, "The United States is the largest oil producer in the world by far. So when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money." So I'm thinking here, Daniel, if the U.S. produces surplus energy, it can also export to allies, right? Could this also strengthen U.S. relations with allies, or even help allies avoid reliance on adversaries?
Absolutely. And we should be supplying all of our allies, right? So you take, for example, something like the natural gas pipeline that is being developed in Alaska, right? A $40 billion project, most of it funded by South Korea, by Japan, because these Asian nations who are our friends, they need natural gas supplies. And obviously it's a lot cheaper for them to go to Alaska, right, across the Pacific, than having to go all the way through the Panama Canal, et cetera, and get to America's Gulf Coast. So this is a wonderful example of how American energy dominance can benefit our allies. And we can keep the good guys, to put it very simply, we can keep the good guys energy independent, and we can choke the bad actors. In the case of Venezuela, Iran, or other countries, we can prevent them from becoming rich and powerful and a threat to America and our allies.
So Daniel, you brought up earlier briefly previous administrations that may have different ideologies when it comes to energy. Is oil, fossil fuels like oil, the most reliable source of energies in the U.S. right now?
Oil and gas and fossil fuels will always be reliable because we have them in abundance, because they work regardless of the weather. We don't need the sun. We don't need the wind. They are always reliable. But the biggest problem I have with the environmental left that has pushed the anti-fossil fuel movement, telling us to, quote unquote, go green and get wind and get solar. Wind and solar only produce electricity, and poorly and very expensively, but that's all they do. Fossil fuels do everything else. It's rubber, it's plastic, it's Band-Aids, it's diapers, it's medicines, it's detergents, right? You can go through the list. So even the people that say, well, if we wouldn't have this problem if we drove EVs are great, but you know what they're made from? They're made from oil and gas and coal. So I don't understand why we would ever get rid of the raw materials of our industry, of cement, of steel, of plastic, of rubber, and pretend that we don't need these products. Wind and solar are stupid. They're expensive. They're made in slave labor camps in communist China, and they make very expensive, poor electricity. Fossil fuels do everything. And if we have a robust fossil fuel economy, we have peace, stability, low prices, and prosperity for everybody.
And just to add to your point, China uses coal to a significant degree for its energy, right? So
China does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know why? Because it works. I wish we were as serious about our electric grid as China is about theirs, right? What does China burn with their coal? They burn the factories to make crappy wind and solar. And then they convince Americans through these climate groups to buy them. But China uses coal because coal always works. China takes its grid very seriously. It takes its manufacturing sector very seriously. I wish American Democrats in particular would be as serious as the Chinese are about their grid.
Okay, just one final question, Daniel. Where do you see nuclear fitting into the equation?
Nuclear is great, and we need it in much more proliferation. We already run the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and it's called the United States Navy. We know how to use nuclear very, very well and very safely, and we've been doing it for decades. But nuclear is essential. I saw Secretary Wright announce that there were 10 nuclear projects underway. Countries like France get 80% of their electricity from nuclear power. So we should have a much more robust nuclear economy. 2 great nuclear power plants, one in California, one in New York, both shut down by Democrats, Gavin Newsom, and at the time, Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York. And there's no reason to take down or dismantle functioning nuclear power plants when we are desperate for reliable baseload power.
All right, great points, great conversation today, Daniel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Law enforcement are on the scene in Michigan responding to a vehicle ramming and shooting at a Jewish synagogue. We have the latest news.